Good morning and good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for standing by and welcome to today's webinar in which we will be talking about integrity as a key driver for sports business. This is Gemma from the Johan Cruyff Institute, your host for today's session. Just a few items before we get started. If you have any technical issues, we will be happy to assist you through the chat tab located on the right side of the screen. You can type your questions in the questions tab, also located on the right of your screen. I will address them to our speaker after the presentation. It's my pleasure to introduce you to Percy Willman, Special Counsel of Genius Sports in Latin America, who leads the advisory and advocacy work, helping leagues and federations develop business verticals focused on data, media rights, and sports integrity. In this webinar, we will analyze in what context the sports industry is reactivating given the current situation and what the expectations of the sport market are. We will also discuss the essential measures that leagues, clubs, and other sports organizations must adopt, the importance of integrity as a tool for income generation, and the impact of the health crisis on the sports betting industry and market. Hi, Percy. Good afternoon. Good morning for you, and very welcome.
Good morning, Gemma. Thank you very much. It's a pleasure to be speaking to all the audience and to everyone from the Cruyff Institute. I'm going to be addressing the issue of integrity, and integrity not seen as a protection measure right now, but more looked at as a source of some key points that will lead the development of business, particularly now in the context of sport and health crisis. The contents, these are the main points I'm going to be touching. I would like to encourage everyone to submit questions if they are directly or attention, not specific about the topic. I will be more happy to address them. I will be running a Q&A with Gemma at the end. So I'm going to try to give it as much time as possible. It would be very, very good to get your feedback and also get all the information that you have, share experiences, and also obviously your questions. So I'm going to be starting with the sports market and what I would call the sports market panorama. And this part, I'm going to be very transparent. I'm not a sports marketing specialist. I've worked in the commercial side of sports, so I have some knowledge about this. But what I wanted to do is give you a picture of where we were standing probably December 2019, January 2020. And the structure, and this is very basic, but the structure of the income in leagues and rights holders is focused on three main points. Media, which is traditionally known as broadcasting rights, the commercial side, which is advertising, brand sponsorship, the sale of jerseys, the association between a club, a team, an athlete, and a certain brand. And for arena competitions or stadium competitions, you would have match day income, which is tickets, hospitality, season passes, which are sold upfront, and revenues from food stands and local shop, which is sometimes available in the stadiums. I'm using some numbers here, and I'm doing this on purpose just to look at some of the top leagues in the world right now. The NBA had a TV rights deal, $24 billion over 9 years, extremely lucrative. Premier League, the same, is one of the highest grossing football leagues in the world. We're talking about an estimated total added up $12 billion agreement from the Premier League. We got the Major League Baseball, which is very, very much a local sport in the United States. It's not consumed as much outside of the US as it is here in the United States, but still making $5 billion in a 7-year media arrangement. If you're looking at commercial brands and more global brands, you have, the leader in terms of kit agreements with Adidas, Manchester United, with bonuses and all add-ups. We're talking about 75 million a year in British pounds. And if we're talking about the biggest crossing property in match tickets, season passes, hospitality, we're talking about Barcelona Football Club, followed closely by its rival Real Madrid in the vicinity of 140 million euros. That is a picture of the top leagues, top players in the world. And in 2020 and previously for the last 3-4 years, we've seen something very interesting going on. As I said, the initial structure is broadcasting, commercial, and advertising. But then who owns broadcasting, who owns the rights is the discussion that's been changing. We have the rise of OTT, which is over the top production, is basically having a platform like Netflix, like Amazon Prime, Hulu, Fubo TV. They produce or they buy production from other sources, they wrap it up and bundle it up, and you can stream it online. We're no longer depending on cable. We're no longer depending on an agreement with a TV provider, satellite provider. We have this accessible both on our desktop, on our smart TVs, on our smartphones. The second very important change in these last years is AI. You know, artificial intelligence was something that we used to see in movies. It was something that was very far away. Today, people who are linked or know about a production of particularly content, video content, you will know that artificial intelligence is now powering a lot of that production. So you reduce costs in terms of production, manpower, but you can attain the same quality and same resolution with, you know, less logistics involved. Another key issue, and it's something that's been discussed a lot, is who owns the rights now. And we used to see the model in which, you know, a league sells it to a company, let's say ESPN, just as an example, and then ESPN does the world distribution. Well, that is changing now. A league may be now the owner of its media rights. It will be sharing them in different platforms. It may transfer them to open air TV or cable TV, but it will retain the rights to use them in their own OTT or in their own streaming devices or highlights for their YouTube channels, social media. And also athletes are changing. You know, an athlete used to be the guy, you know, he's a football player, for instance, he's playing for a team, you know, he gets a salary, he gets his bonuses, maybe he gets an appearance right for some sort of brand like shaving cream or, you know, a TV company or a car. But now the brand itself is growing. An athlete is becoming a brand. We all know who CR7 is Cristiano Ronaldo. He developed this brand, 3 symbols, very simple. Usain Bolt, you know, someone who is very recognizable within his sport. He had his celebration like this with his hand. That is obviously branding. He is creating a brand. He is creating a celebration, a symbol that is identified with himself. So that has been changing, and that is a market that has been changing a lot. We have more actors, more participants, more ways to distribute content, and more ways to consume sport. And I'm going to jump ahead a little bit just to look at this from this perspective of what the situation is. And I want to do this because, like I said, I did it on purpose. I was talking on purpose about what we have in terms of the top earners, the top producers of content, and the brands that we look at more and more when we turn on the TVs, we open our phones. But the truth is that broadcasting income, yes, it is around 60% of, it's around 50 to 60 billion, but that's all that amount is concentrated. Around 60% of it is concentrated in just 10 sports leagues. And we need to be very much aware of this particular detail because things are not as bright, and they were not as bright January 2020, December 2019 for the rest of the leagues in the world. It was not as easy. And one of the things that we're looking at, for instance, and that's why I'm jumping ahead on this slide, is, you know, EFL Championship. It's just the second tier of English football, just behind the Premier League. And if we discount the Premier League clubs or former Premier League clubs that are getting parachute payments, as this is, as you know, the Premier League, if you're relegated, you still get payments for 2 or 3 years more from what you earned in your time in the first division. If you discount those 5 teams, 13 out of 16 teams had wage bills that were higher than their income. And this is the second tier of the most rich league in the world. And we have this level of expenditure. We have this problem in their balance sheet. And it is a huge issue because if that's happening there, you can see we can trickle down, we can jump down the ladder and look, for instance, as a club, Universitario de Deportes in Peru, They have 177 million in debt today. A club whose cash flow per year is not even 1/20th of that. So we have huge issues in sport. And that has been shocked, hit in the face with the global health crisis, the coronavirus. Why? First of all of a sudden we have no competition. Okay, there's been no football, for instance, except for 3 leagues all around the world. This has never happened in the history of modern sport. Not even during the Second World War, not even during the First World War. The stadiums today, now that we are restarting, you will notice they're restarting without fans in the stands. We have computer-generated images, we have pre-recorded sound, we have chants. It almost looks like a FIFA game, you know, a PlayStation, Xbox FIFA game. Athletes, directors, the staff, you have to go through different protocols if you want to participate in sport. You have some waiting time. If, for instance, you're tested positive with coronavirus, you have to immediately self-isolate. You cannot train. This disruption can last between 2 weeks and a month. And if you look at the contractual obligations, if you look at contracts between clubs, leagues, broadcasters, sponsors, there is no sport. Many of these contracts are based on the number of games delivered to consumers. Sponsorships are based on the number of people that can actually see you wearing a shirt or see your advertising or actually buy what you're trying to sell. And if you add this to another complication, which is a lot of clubs and a lot of leagues relied on the advance of these receivables. Many of these leagues rely on getting that money in advance, and then eventually throughout the year they will be paying, they will be completing this, they will be fulfilling their obligations through games, through media exposure, through different activities that they organize, but nothing of this will be able to be taking place. So it is a true global crisis, and it's a true global health problem that we have that has affected sport at every level. What are the changes now? And I'm jumping now ahead again into my slide. Is first of all, we have hundreds and hundreds of athletes that are out of work. Many, don't think just football in this case. Let's think about tennis. Let's think about athletics, swimming, any individual sport, team sports that are not very high up in the ladder. They have stopped. People dedicated to sport are not making money. And leagues are gonna have to adapt to COVID-19. They're gonna have to probably reduce the number of teams in the leagues because some cannot afford to pay all their obligations. They're gonna have to change the format of the leagues. Some leagues are talking about concentrating games like a World Cup in 2-3 months, and then giving teams rest for 2-3 months again. This changes completely the landscape. We are spoiled in the offer of sport. We're spoiled in the number of games that we had available until the global health crisis. We used to have sport 24/7 all around the world. Today, that is changing. And now I'm gonna, again, dwelling into the more marketing side of sport, we will have to make changes. We need to really address the problem. We need to really address the situation by understanding that one, sport will continue, but two, it is important that our brand, our team, as an athlete, as a personal, an individual involved in sport, we need to return. And how are we going to do it? Successful restart, in our understanding, my understanding, relies on 3 things. One is a brand. Okay, there has to be a brand. There has to be an identifiable person, game, league, team, federation, whatever it is. You have to own your brand. You have to grow your brand. People need to know who you are. You need to be available for them. And you need to be easily identifiable. You have to differentiate from the rest of the people. Second, there has to be a product. There cannot be a league without games. That's why you need to organize the leagues in a different fashion, a fashion that obviously complies with all the legal obligations right now regarding health of athletes and officials, but also in a way that responds to the needs of your clients, which are the consumers or the sports fans. And you need to understand that there are differences between sports fans. There is the fanatic, the ultra, the guy that is completely devoted to a sport, or completely devoted to a team in particular. His demand is not very elastic. Is a person that he will stick with you in good and bad. But that, to be honest, in global sport is not the majority of people. So you need to understand what the requirements of those other fans are as well. You need to know your customer. You need to know what type of sport they're looking, what type of games, how often, if they want back-to-back games. And the third, and this is the point that I'm going to be focusing because it has to do a lot with the specific topic today, of our conversation today, is reputation. We need to eliminate corruption from sport. And the reason why is because nobody will want to consume sport anymore if it is affected by corruption, if it has a sort of question dwelling around it, if the games are real, or if this is fixed, or if this is in the benefit of 2 or 3 specific individuals and not of the sport itself. So what we have to do now is we need to activate current income sources. Okay, we need to look at our income sources. We need to keep them. And we need to incorporate new verticals, new ways of revenue, new sources of revenue. And at the same time, it is extremely important. We need to keep our reputation. We need to have a healthy sport. So that's why now the organizer is gonna submit a poll question. And this poll question is very important for us because, as you have seen, one of the highest growing sources of income for sport is betting. Sportsbooks, betting houses have been relating with sport for a long time, but now it's much more visible. The second thing is, I wanted to just give you an example. For instance, in UK football, now every team in the championship has a betting sponsor. If you look at Copa Libertadores in South America, you would see, for instance, in 2018, I think they had an issue with a Brazilian club that had a betting sponsor in their shirt. And at that time, 2017, 2018, betting was not allowed in Brazil. It was strictly forbidden. So what they did is they used the shirt internationally. They were using it in countries in which sports betting either was allowed or was not forbidden. That, for instance, shows, and it demonstrates that betting has been linked with sport for a long time. And I would be really interested if you could please answer the poll question to get a little idea of where are we, or for instance, what is the response that you have in our audience. And the reason why is that because it's very important to understand where are we standing here. Are we against betting in sport? Are we indifferent? Are we okay with betting in sport? It's a key question. So when we have those results, it would be great to have a look at them. I'm just going to jump a little bit into the chat. And yes, see, for instance, we have Marin Marinov in Bulgaria. Every single Bulgaria Premier League and second division club has a betting company as a sponsor. And that is not surprising, Marin. That is actually a trend that's been repeated in Eastern Europe, in Western Europe, in South America, in Asia. It's very, very common. And one of the things that we need to discuss is, what is sports betting? Is it the bad guy or is it the good guy? And when we talk about this issue, when we talk about this industry, we immediately think about match fixing. I've put on the screen a definition of match fixing, what it is, and I'm going to just run through it quickly. It's intentional arrangement, it's an action or an omission to change something in sport, in a game particular, in an event within a sport. Okay? So we are taking away the unpredictable nature of sport, and sport itself relies on this. This is extremely, extremely important, because if we don't have the unpredictability, the uncertainty of sport, we have a fixed show. It's like a theater. It's like a presentation. For instance, there's a lot of people that are huge fans of the World Wrestling Organization, and they organize great shows. But in my understanding, and I can be completely wrong, and I will easily discuss this with anyone that wants to discuss it. This is a show, okay? It's a show. It's just put together. There's an outcome that is already staged or agreed between the parties and the people involved there. This is not really a competition. And a competition has this unpredictable nature. And it is extremely important that we talk about it, because if we take that away, if we are not protecting it, we are killing sport. I want to refer, for instance, to what Richard McLaren said. Richard McLaren was one of the persons that was the author of the world famous RUSADA anti-doping report for the World Doping Organization. And this is his investigation into the state-sponsored doping. And he was very clear. He said that doping and match fixing combined were the two biggest issues affecting the integrity of sport today. And the reason why, it's very clear. We've seen at the beginning of my presentation, we've seen loads of sports, the one that we consume at the top of the pyramid, okay, that top 1%. They make millions, and their athletes are paid, incredible amounts of money. But that is not the reality. That really is not what's going on in the world. There's athletes in football leagues in the first division that make a decent salary, like any other worker would do in that country, but it's not the millions that we tend to see when we think about Messi, Ronaldo, we think about Neymar, we think about all of those guys. So the truth is that in sport, there are a lot of athletes that are underpaid or they're barely paid to cover their costs. One example, for instance, is tennis. Tennis is a pyramid. Everybody wants to be in the top 100, but it's not just because of a number. It's because if you're in the top 100, you're going to be making money enough to make a profit. If you're outside of the top 100, you're barely going to be covering costs, or you have to invest money and look money from other sources so you can keep up your career. So if you are at the bottom, you are fighting to get into futures competitions, fighting to get into challengers with very, very small prize money, you are exposed, and that is the problem. The leagues and organizations and competitions need to look to their competition and understand how much are players or athletes making. Are they really exposed or not? And the majority of them will be exposed to threats, exposed to approaches from people trying to disturb a match, manipulate a match. Just recently, the Tennis Integrity Unit announced that during the third quarter of 2020, they had an increase in the number of players reporting match fixing attempts or manipulation attempts. And the problem is, not all the leagues, not all the competitions have a proper integrity service and proper integrity structure that allows them to address these issues. And why is this important for a business perspective? Okay, in principle, I think we can all agree. In principle, we want to protect the integrity of sport. Okay? We do not want corruption in sport. That should be the answer, full stop. But the truth is that sometimes we need to give it a little bit more context. In this case, the context is business. What you see on the screen right now on the right is a publication from Gazzetta dello Sport. And Gazzetta is one of the most important publications, the sport-dedicated publications in Italy. At the bottom, you would see a publication in the front page is still addressing the problem of corruption and match fixing in Italian football 10 years later. This, for me, when I saw it, was incredible. This means the situation and the problem just does not disappear from one year to the other. That was the case. It was called Calciopoli, and it was a case in which Italian clubs, some of the top tier Italian clubs, were relegated. They were fined. They were put in the spotlight because they were involved in match fixing. They were involved in mafias, with mafias. They were involved with illegal betting syndicates. So we can see that this directly affects their reputation. But also, it is important to understand that this affects income. This affects profit. You will not want your brand to be associated with your sport, with your league, if you're involved in match fixing or corruption. Give you some simple examples from a little bit back from an article a colleague of mine published. Indian cricket, okay? There was this terrible match fixing incident detected in around 2013. Apart from the damage to sport, how much money they lost? They lost $71 million in an early termination of an agreement they had with Pepsi. Now you can say, well, Pepsi never said that it was because of this specific scandal. They won't say it. It's opening the door to more discussion. But they terminated it because, in my understanding and a lot of people in the industry, it was because they do not want to be associated with a sport and a league that is involved in these type of incidents. Similar case, Puma sponsoring the South African Football Association for their jerseys or kits. Early termination because there were questions on the warm-up games before the 2010 World Cup. Just to have an idea, in 2013, after this happened, the income of that association went from 80 million to 20 million. Okay? They lost 60 million in income in 2013. Let's go to a different sport, tennis. 2016, loads of questions about integrity of sport, loads of questions about fixtures in the Australian Open. They had deals with sponsors that dropped. One of them specifically represented losing $3.8 million. And this is a competition that is a 3-week competition. So 3.8 million is a lot of money. It's not just spread out in 12 months. So what we're trying to say here is sport that does not have good governance, that doesn't take, protect itself, and it doesn't take seriously the integrity of the competition will have severe consequences. I just mentioned it before. You really want to protect the fact that any team can beat the other one. Even if one team is much better than the other one athlete is much better than the other one, you have to have some uncertainty. Also, reputation drains. If you lose reputation, you will be draining resources for a long time. We've seen it with the Italian football. And this is also very important. Sports betting is a huge industry. Players that are in the legal market represent a smaller percentage of that industry, but those players are the ones you see in advertising. Those players are the ones that you regularly see in betting shops, or you would see on TV with ads or with campaigns on social media. If they are involved, or I want to clarify, if they're exposed to match fixing, they lose money. So this is not just an issue in which a league or a sports team is going to be affected financially. Sportsbooks are the ones who may be forced to pay a fixed match. And if that happens, they are losing money. They will never even approach your league again. As a sponsor, they will never put their logo in your shirt. They will even get close to you because you represent losing money. So what are we looking at in terms of integrity? What should we be doing to protect sport and also to foster the generation of income? First of all, we need regulation. It is impossible to establish a program, an integrity program, if we do not have a set of rules. And what I mean a set of rules is, to the minimum, an organization should have, even if it's a federation, if it's a league, or even a club, a specific regulation book or a specific set of norms that addresses match fixing, manipulation of sport, approaches from people that want to manipulate the game, and how you relate to betting. Key point right here, an athlete should be able to have some resource that tells him if he can bet, if someone close to him can bet, and if you can put a wager, what can you do? Can you do it in your own sport? Can you do it only outside of your country? Can you do it in sports that are not related to the one you practice? These are questions that an athlete needs to be able to answer. And honesty, to be completely honest here, it is unfair to ask an athlete to get answers to these questions if the sport itself, the league, the club, has not provided the materials or the resources to reach that question, to reach that answer. Okay, this is a basic legal principle. Okay, you cannot sanction someone for something that was not a law or a rule before he committed the offense. Second, sport has to identify situations that are at risk, both from an analysis into its own sport, determining who is at risk, if we as a league are at risk, or also you need to identify situations that can be potentially suspicious, that involve suspicious betting activity. There are various resources out there in the market that monitor betting markets and provide reports and provide this information. Third, and I'm going to maybe jump in from one side to the other, education is key. Okay, education is absolutely important. If we do not educate athletes, if we do not educate people in sport about what is being done to protect integrity, what are the rules, and how are we dealing with potential threats, we lose complete credibility. And I'm not limiting education to just the people involved, the football player, the tennis player, the swimmer. I am extending education to everyone. People need to know what the sport is doing. People need to know what type of betting is allowed in their country, in their jurisdiction, if it is allowed, if it is not allowed. And people need to know what sport is doing about it in general. Also, communication, okay? And this goes in part with education. What are we doing to tell people we are taking action? It used to be, and this happened to me one long time ago when I was already working for Genius Sports. I was talking with the vice president of a first division league in South America. And we were sitting down talking about different business models and different things that we were working. And one thing that I mentioned is we need to put together an integrity program. First thing that they asked is, what do you mean? So I explained pretty much what I explained today. And the second thing was shocking. Both of them, almost at the same time, said that is not necessary. That doesn't happen here. Like the global health situation, sports betting is global, okay? So if you think that because your country forbids betting and it is not happening, you're wrong. If you think that because you haven't heard anything about it, sports betting is not happening, you're wrong. Today, people around the world can put wagers on games. If you are in, Hong Kong, for instance, or if you are in Japan, or if you are in Pacific Island, you can be putting wagers on games that are taking place in Trinidad, in Central America, in South America, even in Alaska. Okay, this can be happening completely around the world, and you have no information about it. So to live in denial is the worst approach. You need to stand up to the problem if there is, or stand up ahead of the problem and communicate what's going on. And finally, if you have issues, you need to combat those issues. You need to set up an investigation. You need to set up a procedure. You need to set up proceedings, which is different in terms of more adjudication of cases. You need to know how you interact with law enforcement. You need to know how you interact with local judiciary. You need to know, for instance, when to suspend an investigation. If the police is also investigating, what type of evidence is going to be used, what type of issues are acceptable during the process, if you can exchange submissions, if you want testimonials. A lot of procedural legal stuff that is maybe boring for a lot of people, but it's extremely important because if you do not follow procedure, if you do not have an organized set of rules, no matter how obvious the case is, you will not be able to sanction, you will not be able to put fines, or you will not be able to suspend the people that are involved. And also, more importantly, you need to have integration with international law enforcement. And the reason why is because you may be able to suspend the player for trying to fix a game, but you're not really addressing the problem there. You're addressing the end of the problem. It's like a string. But if you want to go to the top of the issues, you will understand that one, this is a global international problem, and two, in the second, you need cooperation, you need integration between different agencies, different offices, and different jurisdictions in order to really, really cut the problem. Now, when I'm going to look at some case studies, and these case studies are very important to understand how are these situations working, what actions can be taken. So the first one is, this is just full disclosure, this is our company, who we work with, some of the leagues that we work with, we have from, golf, we got football, lacrosse, baseball, different leagues that we work in, so in integrity and in sport. So our experience is based on, what we've done with all of these leagues and organizations. First case study, for instance, I want to touch is something that we work with Genius Sports, is PGA. The PGA had a requirement in a particular situation. As you know, golf is like tennis and international circuits, so you may have people competing in different parts of the world at the same time. How do you set up a system in which you can actually control what's going on and at the same time educate people? Well, in the PGA, we set up, obviously, we started with rules, regulations, work with them in terms of setting up what are the acceptable and non-acceptable conduct. Second, a handheld system in which, from your phone, you can pretty much take tests, educate yourself, educate athletes, educate people around them to understand what can be and what cannot be done. Monitoring, understanding what the market is doing, what's happening, and then setting up a system for investigations. Again, extremely important. If you have these four prongs, if you want to say it, that are completely integrated and in use. Second one, Football Data Co, for instance. Football Data Co is the company that runs a data system for Premier League. So it's pretty much a company owned by the Premier League. It's responsible also for protecting the integrity of both English and Scottish football. And it's also managing a particular situation, which is, Premier League is the league that receives more betting, attracts more betting from markets around the world. What was necessary here is you need to know what's going on. And for that, Premier League set up a monitoring system that it was 24/7. They know exactly what's going on in every single betting market around the world. Where is there suspicious activity? What is going on in live in-games? All major markets are covered. Asian sportsbooks are covered. And also, reports are made. There is a lot of education going on with Premier League. And also, and additionally, everything is integrated. Everything is managed in real time. So if there's situations that are suspicious, you can issue alerts, you can communicate with the teams, you can communicate with the league, and also, sportsbooks can suspend the market. So if there's something suspicious, there's an integration of information from all different sources. And you may say now, okay, we talked about PGA, biggest league in the biggest organization in golf in the world, Premier League, biggest organization in the world. Well, we have also regional cases that have been successful. Particularly one, which I'm really happy with, is Dimayor in Colombia. And Dimayor faced a particular challenge. Okay? Colombia is the first country in Latin America to regulate sports betting. They have regulation, specific regulation for this. They opened the market. They have 18 operators now with licenses. And they needed to introduce Colombia as a government and Dimayor as a league, they needed to introduce integrity as a focal point of what is being done to protect the sport, to protect the market, and to protect betting operators. What we did, first of all, beginning from scratch, we sat down with Coljuegos, which is the agency, Colombian agency that regulates betting in the country, and we discussed what needs to be done in terms of integrity. Then next month, organizing free seminar for anyone who wanted to attend, particularly for people within the sports industry, government officials, and media, why sport integrity matters. We need to focus on this is important point. We cannot just think that an open market with regulation is going to protect itself. We need to do something to protect it. Eventually, we sat down with DiMayor, and in November 2019, they launched a match fixing prevention program with Genius Sports. And finally, not as a coincidence, January 2020, they announced BetPlay would be their official betting partner. The sequence in this case is very important because you introduce integrity, but then you realize that without integrity, without proper protection, you will not attract sponsorship and investors that are significant for your market, for your league. The way we did it eventually opened up the door for a reputable partner in the country, sorry. So now that I've reviewed some of these cases, I'm going to open up for questions from you, and I'm looking right now at the poll results. The majority of you, I would say 2/3, agree with sports betting and advertising sports betting, but with reservations. There are some negatives, some favorable. So we have a very mixed audience that will be really good for us now in our discussion. Yes, Gemma.
Yes, Percy, thank you. Yeah, you saw already that most of them agree, but with reservations.
Yes. Well, it's understandable.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so we've got a question from Marin. Says, what do you think of a single betting company sponsoring 80% of the clubs and also the league itself?
Yes, I saw that. In general, I don't see that much of an issue as long as that is just sponsoring and advertising and not necessarily influencing in the game or the clubs. And the reason why is because there is one thing which is there's a difference between related commercially, it has a commercial relationship, and the other is between you actually own the clubs. My concern would be if this income is 80% of the income of the club or the league. Maybe we would have some issues there. But if that league has proper regulations, and I would ask Marin if he knows about it, but if there is an integrity program, if there are leagues or this league in particular, I think it's in Bulgaria, has safeguards in place, I wouldn't be that concerned. I think most of the time that company would be more exposed to match fixing rather than being involved in match fixing.
Mm-hmm. And Vanessa says, what do you think of betting companies owning football teams? That
probably comes from Vanessa. You're from yes, you're from Mexico. I knew it. I think it has to be dealt directly case by case. And the reason why is because as long as you can keep completely separate one industry, one business model, one business from the other, there shouldn't be an issue. I am being honest. I said it in the conference in Mexico a couple of years ago with Ricardo de Buen in the panel. And I said it, I don't think it's ideal, but if you can pretty much separate both business completely, then you would probably have, a reasonable safety in place. Like I said for Marin's question, the truth is that if you're putting advertising out there and you're putting, your image and your logos in the public, you are really the one who's exposed to match fixing. Usually the biggest betting companies are not the ones who are driving a manipulation in sport. It's completely the opposite. It's those shady companies or companies that are working the gray or in the black market that are behind some sort of money laundering or some sort of manipulation. So in general, it's tricky, but I will also say that as long as you can keep them both business separate, it should be all right. Probably is something that the league should address, but I can understand it can generate debate.
Yeah, yes, sure. Look, Fermín Torrejón says, doesn't FIFA and the different country federations have a division that regulates betting?
Hi, Fermín, you're from my country. No, what FIFA has is an integrity department, and the integrity department, as you know, is from FIFA. So FIFA regulates federations, regulates the leagues within the federations and national teams. So it pretty much addresses it from the national association perspective. There is no way FIFA can regulate betting in a country, because that is it's a country's regulation, and it's their jurisdiction. It can be federal, it can be state, like in the United States. So what FIFA can do is set up what they have done is set up a very strong program in which they educate, and they also collaborate with different companies, including us, for monitoring. Well, one of the examples that I can give you is the qualifiers for the World Cup. There was an issue with one of the FIFA referees, Lamptey. I cannot exactly remember his last name. And through the program that FIFA has and the monitoring from several companies, including us, they were able to determine that there was a sort of manipulation in some of the games played, that he had participated as a referee. They had to replay, I think, one of the games, and this person, the referee, was suspended for life from being involved in football. That is what the FIFA can do. They can issue regulations within their pyramid or within their industry and within their structure, and also recommendations for different jurisdictions. But in the end, the regulation of sports betting is autonomous for each country or territory.
Aldo Perez says, which regulations do you think can accomplish that business separation?
You refer to the Mexican case, or I think it's corporate regulations itself. First of all, you need to have separate companies. That's the first thing. Okay? You cannot have a company that has one vertical is a football club and the other vertical is sports betting, even if shareholders can be similar. The second one is the person involved in managing one cannot be managing the other. It's almost like when in a law firm they set up a Chinese wall. If they want to, they separate one team from the other. I think if you can do that, you can demonstrate that there is a proper separation in both businesses. But again, I can understand that this could be controversial, or it could be tricky. But at the same time, if there are some actions that you can take.
And also, Percy, you said in your presentation, we've seen how much, for example, TV broadcasters are investing in sport to get the rights of the leagues and other competitions. How much are betting companies investing on sponsoring clubs, for example?
Well, exact numbers is hard to say, because not all of those agreements are disclosed. But you can look at the number of brands associated with sport. You can look at football, for instance, in the Premier League. You can look, for instance, let's look at advertising in stadiums. You have the fixed advertising, but now it's dynamic because there's screens. That is charged by the second. Okay? So when you put your brand in there, you put a significant amount of money per second that is displayed. And those ads have replaced traditional advertisers like beer, for instance, or alcohol, because sports betting is driving up the price of that, and they're still able to pay. Some clubs in Europe have regional betting partner, and they have an Asian betting partner, and they have a betting partner for the Americas, knowing that their games are watched in different regions around the world. So it is significant. It is significant. It is important also. It's an important income for a lot of clubs. And the way you need to manage it is probably, having good regulations in your country. If you have good regulations in your country, you have good regulations in your league, and you address integrity as an important issue, I'm sure the biggest companies are going to approach you, and you will be safer than dealing with companies that you don't know or have absolutely no track record.
Mm-hmm. How can, for example, how can organizations on a limited budget improve the integrity of their competitions?
Yes, that's a very good question. Well, you have a limited budget. It's going to affect probably services that you can hire from third parties. At least we, for instance, work on a very flexible system with a lot of leagues and organizations. So I'm happy to discuss it when anybody wants it. But I mean, looking at your own regulations, it's pretty much free. I mean, you can sit down and look at your bylaws. You can look at your competition rules. You can look at your disciplinary code, whatever you have, and say, okay, is this addressing the problem or not? That's the first step, and that will not cost much. Most leagues have an in-house lawyer. Most leagues are linked to a world governing body or federation that has these resources, has a model bylaw, has a model regulation, or has some sort of training or education on integrity and preventing corruption in sport. So the first step is looking in the house, really, and seeing what do you have in hand. And maybe the answer can be easier than you think. As you look at it and you say, well, I don't have any rules at all. Okay, that's concerning. That was for free. And the second thing is, okay, where can I find them? What can I, the internet is also great because you're going to find a lot of reading resources in terms of integrity. Your own federation, if we're talking about professional sport, you will always be affiliated with one federation, international federation, and reach out to them. They probably have at least an integrity officer, an integrity point of contact. And then from there, you can start scaling. But the first thing is probably clean up the house. And also look into your country. If your country doesn't address this in the criminal code or has not dealt with this in the police as a task force or something, then maybe you need to sit down with the Minister of Sport or Education or Justice and probably put this in the agenda.
Mm-hmm. And do you think that betting can be seen like a fan engagement tool?
Yeah, definitely. There is a statistic which I don't remember specifically, but it was very striking. A few years ago, when sports betting was still forbidden in the United States because when they repealed PASPA, it was opened for the U.S. There was this huge discussion that if fantasy leagues were betting or not betting, really, which discussion is now obsolete, really. But at that time, there was this huge discussion that produced a lot of statistics that demonstrated that, for instance, the football league, the American Football League, saw fans following more games, watching more games, following more teams, just because they had a fantasy team.
Yeah.
And it's simple. It makes sense. If you are a fan of, I don't know, the Dallas Cowboys, you would probably want to watch all the Dallas Cowboys games, right? But if in fantasy league you have a limited number of players from a single team that you can pick to organize your roster. So you pick somebody from the Green Bay Packers, and then you want something from the Patriots, and someone, I don't know, I'm just naming the Raiders. And then you want to know what's going to happen with your team. So you're going to be looking at those games as well. You're going to be looking at the Raiders. You're going to be looking at the Packers. You're going to be looking at them. The study produced at that time demonstrated that in average, people were watching 5 or 6 games more of the 17-game season that they were usually, I'm thinking 17 games, that they were usually watching. And similar things happen with sports betting. One of the interesting parts of this industry is we always think about betting in the result of a winner, the end result of a game. In-play betting has grown a lot So you can now put money to who's going to get the first yellow card, who's going to score the first goal, what is the partial score in minute 20 at halftime. And you can do that in a combination of games. So you're probably going to be watching not just your favorite team or just one team to win. You're going to be watching 3, 4, 5, or 6 games because you really want to know what's going on, if you want to cash out or not, if you're going to be close to winning or not. The truth is that it is a great way of engaging with fans. A lot of leagues have understood that. So it also increases international visibility. Now, people are going to be following your league. I can give you an example. In Costa Rica recently, there's been a lot of following, not only regional, not even Central American, but all around the world, because it's one of the first leagues that started, and it has exposure through, one of the things is betting internationally. So even if in Costa Rica you cannot do sports, you cannot place bets. Mm-hmm. So I do think it's key.
And Percy, my last question is, if you had to choose, if you had to choose a league or a sport that could be a good example of integrity, what would it be?
I think there's several. I think obviously Premier League is one of the top and is the leader in this, in part also because legal betting has been allowed in the United Kingdom for decades. So they have a lot more experience. They work with the Gambling Commission. They are very good in terms of managing information. They control their data. They distribute organizedly. They're key. But other leagues have done a really good, they have done really well in Spain, the Spanish league. There's been issues with match fixing, but the reason why they've identified it is because they have a good program. A lot of these things have surfaced because they have actually been able to identify things. And sometimes, you have a league and this happens and people, have discussions, and it's in forums, it's on Twitter, and there's a lot of rumors. If you don't have an official source of information, you cannot do a good job. We're working right now with Colombia, Di Mayor. I think the program is really good, and we are still working to increase a lot of topics, a lot of issues, fine tune it. It's really good work. Then, for instance, I know tennis is a controversial sport because they have they've identified a lot of problems, but the fact that they have a tennis integrity unit dedicated to investigate these issues is good. And you can find specific examples of good governance. Golf has good governance, and the problem is, I think sometimes it has to do with one of the questions that we had is you may think that because these leagues are doing it, it's extremely expensive, and you cannot do it because you are a mid-tier league or second division. But the truth is, it's very available. It's much easier than what you think.
Mm-hmm. Okay, Percy, so I think so we can leave it here. Okay, I thank you very much for your time, sharing your knowledge with us, and so good luck in your business.
Thank you. Thanks.
Okay, and thanks everyone for participating. Remember that you will soon receive a link to the webinar recording. We invite you, as always, to stay connected and keep following new webinars. And you can find all the information in our social media channels. Thank you for your attention. Thank you, Percy.
Gemma. Just one thing, I just noticed that my email is wrong. So if anybody has any questions, my email is Percy Willman. For some reason, I erased the P. But so if anybody has a question, please feel free to just reach out. I'll be more than happy to answer.
Okay, thank you very much for your availability. And yes, thank you everyone for the attention, and see you soon. Bye-bye.
Thank you, Gemma. Thank you, everyone. Bye.